What if we want to allow a specific person to assign licenses, but limit how many they can assign and to whom? And we want to log all this activity so we can audit and report what they've done. We can do this safely in Sapio 365 by setting up a custom role for this purpose. And we can delegate this role to anyone, even non-IT personnel, including those who haven't even been assigned any directory roles. That's because Sapio 365 can define these privileges and set up very narrow limits called scopes on what actions can be taken, as well as log all activity, so everything can be audited, reported, and controlled with complete security. So let's task this user, Lee, to assign licenses, and only within the marketing department. And I'm going to limit the type and number of licenses he can assign to a maximum of 7. Here's how I've set this up. The session info shows that I'm currently signed in as the administrator, and here in the roles panel, we can see that this role is already configured, and this is the role that I've assigned to Lee. And we can see how I've set this up. Right now, the options include the ability to, we're going to log all the user activity, and we also could have enforced Lee to use this role only. I've made it optional. We can see the permissions here, including the use of editing user licenses, of course. I've also included the ability to edit groups because in this case, some licenses may be assigned via groups. So those are the 2 privileges I've included here, or permissions. And finally, the licenses include only the assignment of Microsoft Flow Free. So Lee can only assign up to a maximum of 7 of these, and I've set the limits on the rest to 0, so he has no access to any of the other licenses. Now let's see what happens when Lee signs in, what he can and cannot do with this role. Here I can sign in as Lee, and when Lee signs in, he can choose this role, or as we saw, we can enforce it as the only option. And Lee can always review the details of the role he's using for this session with the role info button. And this says everything Lee does with this role is going to be logged, so this will be useful for auditing later. And the permissions that Lee has with this role is the editing of licenses for both users and groups. Next, we see the scopes. These limit the scope of what Lee can do with this role. In our case, we don't want Lee to manage licenses for everyone, only those who belong to the marketing department. And again, for these flow licenses, we've set a maximum of 7 that can be assigned using this role, and all others are set to 0. So basically, Lee can't touch the others. Lee can only work with this license type and only assign a maximum of 7 of them. This kind of setup allows departments to have controlled budgets in terms of the licenses they're allowed to use. And so budgets can be set up for a specific number of licenses, and it doesn't mean they must use them all, but at least there's an upper limit set. This makes it much easier for allocation within a department and ensures complete control. So this is what our user Lee sees when he signs in and uses this role. Now when Lee loads the list of users, it's limited to the marketing department. And these are the only users he has access to. And remember, you can set this scope to be as complex as you want using any combination of these properties. Next, he might want to manage some of these. Let's say some new users have joined the company, and Lee can only assign these Flow Free licenses with this role. So what he can do next is select the new users, those who are unlicensed. And you can see now that these buttons are restricted. Only licenses and group membership can be accessed. And neither can edit, create, or delete be used, since this is not part of this role. So next, Lee opens the licenses. And since they're new, we can see that these have nothing assigned yet. And so he can assign licenses to these. And again, you'll notice that because of the limitations we've put here, these are not available. They each indicate 0. He's only able to assign Microsoft Flow Free licenses, and we've selected 3. There are 3 available, so we can do this. So that's how Lee can manage a predefined pool of licenses within the marketing department by using this role. Finally, how do we see what activity was done with this role? Let's audit Lee's activity log. First, we switch back to the admin session The administrator has rights to access to activity logs. And in the information, we see the activity logs. And if I group this by username, we can see this role and all the activity that was performed with it. And if Lee was not signed into this role, but working under his own username, we'd see his activity under his name. And if we wanted to report this, we might use the action taken, subgroup that. And now we can see exactly what actions were performed and when, all within this role. So now we have a clear report of all activity by each role and user. So that's how we can use roles to safely delegate privileges to just about anyone and still maintain control within any limits you want to set. You can be as granular as you need to, and even log all this activity so you can audit and report what's been done. This means you can customize these roles to just about anyone, even to non-IT personnel, making it much easier for IT managers to offload tasks like license allocation to those within a department, yet still maintain complete control.